Can one person who has undergone a health transition inspire thousands in a company to do the same? Improving or even transforming employee health is not easy. It requires motivation and discipline, qualities many of us often struggle to maintain. Our first guest on Full Circle is a seasoned HR leader who has not only transformed his own health but is now inspiring organizations to prioritize employee well being. Saurabh Nigam, founder and CEO of ProGrowth People Solutions, brings over 2 decades of experience working with organizations like Omidyar Network, Snapdeal, and the Aditya Birla Group. He has shaped high performing teams and aligned HR strategies with business growth throughout his career. Welcome to Full Circle, Saurabh. We're thrilled to have you here. Would love to hear your thoughts. I think, sort of, to start with, would actually try to spend a little bit of time on your own personal journey. I think it's extremely inspirational for everybody. So, would like to understand what triggered, how the journey has been, how you keep yourself motivated all throughout, and so on and so forth. So,
Right.
please tell me about it.
Okay. First of all, thanks, Chaitanya. Thanks a lot for inviting me over. It's an absolute honor to be doing this with you, and thanks a lot for the kind words as well. Right. As you said, it's been a journey which has lasted a little over 4.5 years now, and the trigger for it was pretty straightforward. This was in the peak of COVID, after about I think about the first lockdown got over, and my daughter, who back then was about 3.5 years old, I was trying to teach her how to cycle, and these are the days when I would say, at the lowest when it came to my own health, both in terms of how much I weighed and all the kind of backaches and all those issues which I had. Uh, Nothing to talk about in terms of my food habits, eating habits, sleeping habits. I mean, none of that
Yeah.
was in place, and I had all the right, all the usual excuses to make, which I had been making for more than 2 decades since the time I started working, to be in that for being in that shape.
I think all of us are generally in that state as a default, right? So, that is
Yes.
completely understandable. Relate with that.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I had all the excuses up my sleeve, but it's that moment when I was trying to teach my daughter Meher how to cycle. And lockdown had just first lockdown had just gotten over, and when you teach someone a kid how to cycle, you got to keep pace with her, right? And you got to run with her as she tries to cycle. And I couldn't do that, and she fell, right? And to me, that was a trigger. I like, okay, here's a 3.5 year old. She's looking at me, and she's trusting me that I'll not let her fall down as she cycles, and I'm unable to do that, right? Just because I had not taken care of myself. So to me, that was a trigger. This was around 20th of August 2020, Chaitanya, when this thing happened. I said, I need to do something about this, right? This just does not make sense. I'm not being right to my own self. Forget about my own daughter, my family, right? I said, and that's where the trigger came from. I started this journey on 25th August 2024. I don't think possibly I will ever forget that date, because to me that's almost, I consider that's almost like a rebirth, right? Uh, it's been 4.5 years since then. I took hold of my diet, what I eat, more importantly, what I don't eat. Went on a journey wherein I lost significant amount of weight in about 6 months time frame. Lost about 40 odd kilos in 6 months, purely focusing on diet and right habits around sleep. And it's then, after having lost weight, I got into fitness. I got into workouts, got into running, got introduced to running, rather, I would say. And it's been a cycle which has continued since then. And the one simple reason why it has is because my why is very clear. Why I
Yeah.
am on this journey, and that why was that trigger that once you have a child in your life, you want to spend as much time as possible with her, to see her grow, see her evolve as an individual. And to me, that just keeps me going.
So,
Uh,
sort of, say, actually, this is a very common thread, right? So, one of the things, as you know, I worked with a large maternity hospital chain earlier. One of the things that we realized over there was that first, I think having a child is usually your first experience with healthcare in general. And even as fathers, I mean, mothers, of course, go through their transformation, but even as fathers, we've seen that fathers who are expecting a baby start with a nurturing self that comes out of themselves, right? So, they have plants at home, some of them go and get pets. And I think that's the first time that you start thinking about your longevity. Am I
yes.
going to be around to see my
Oh yeah.
kids growing up, going to college, being there to this thing.
Yeah.
My father always used to tell me that you should not have kids when you're so old that when you bend down, you have a have a pain in your back. But if you can't avoid that, at least do something so that your health is in a decent
Oh yeah.
shape when
Oh
that
yeah.
happens, sort of a thing, right?
And your dad was kind enough to say that not be so old enough, because in our generation we are already old at 30s, right?
Yeah,
We
yeah, yeah,
can't
yeah,
wait, right?
yeah.
And one is, honestly speaking, Chaitanya, one is longevity. The
Hmm.
other one is, that huge sense of responsibility which comes to you the moment you are a father, right? You
Absolutely.
are a parent, sorry
Hmm.
to say that. And I think there is no amount of excuses can take that away from you, right? So if you're being honest to yourself, you do realize that ultimately, while the trigger actually came from by looking at her, but the
Hmm.
impact of it, or the positivity of which it gives you, is very, very intrinsic, right? And we can actually speak about that as well, right? That when I look at my own self right now, and you said this, that I and I kind of agree that I don't think I've been more fitter than what I am today, even when I was back in school and college, right? When I used to be a sportsman and all of that, I don't think I was ever like that. Number one, I don't think I was as productive as I am. I was as mentally agile and active as I am today, right? And that all of that is intrinsic, right? So to me, while the trigger came from my daughter, and that to me is the ultimate why, but the huge positive impact which your own health and well-being has on your own self
Absolutely.
is possibly unmatched. You won't trade that for anything else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, eventually you're actually doing it for yourself. The trigger might be, see,
Yeah.
even the fact that you're doing it for your daughter is actually selfish in that nature, right?
Oh,
You
yeah.
want to experience that pleasure of being able to run with her, do all of those things, sort of a thing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And actually, Saurabh sir, I don't know if you've heard and thought about this, but there is, I mean, I speak about longevity. There is also a quality of life angle, right? The fitter you are today, the higher. For example, if you think about it from this perspective, that I want to be able to carry my grandson when I'm 70 years old, right? Which means that today you should be able to do like XYZ things. For example, at 70, that equals to doing a squat with a
Oh, yeah.
7 kg weight. That means you should be able to do it with 40 kg, sort of a thing.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about your own personal health journey, do you actually take those kind of targets, those kind of metrics in place, or it's just
Yeah.
about being fit today, sort of a thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I've always been a guy who loves to put some metrics in place. Okay, some
Yeah.
milestones in place. I like doing that. Personal milestones, right? So at every given point of time in last 4.5 years, I've had my own milestones which I'm chasing. Right.
Got
I can give examples. Right. So it could be as basic as when I started running. A couple of months into running, I said, I want to run 50 kilometers in a month, right?
it.
So 50 kilometers in a month is what I targeted. And like, okay, 30 days, figure it out. So if you're running 3 days in a week, that's about 12 times you're going to run. So 50 divided by 12, you're really talking about, 4 kilometers every run, which was huge when you start off running.
Of course,
And
it's
then you
still.
build on it, right? So cut to that, 1.5 years later, I was, I had a milestone of running 2,500 kilometers in a run, right?
Mm.
In a year, right? Which then, if you trace it back, that's about 200 kilometers, a little more than 200 kilometers in a month, right? 50 kilometers a week, right? The moment you have milestones, and then you committed towards those milestones to achieve them, right? Then you see progress. It's
Mm.
as simple. And then the way I look at it, Chaitanya, is that those milestones are my own, right? And up until you ask me this question, I don't talk about it because those are very intrinsic to me. And I'm doing it only because, one, I feel motivated by the fact that, okay, I got to achieve that. Second, you feel nice when you get there, right? And then you keep building on that because there is no end to it. There's absolutely no end to it in terms of where you can take it, how innovative you can be, and how interesting you want to make it, right? So, for example, there are times when I've done, okay, let's coming out of a injury or coming out of a bad health, I said, okay, and coming back to running after say few weeks, it's not easy. And I said, okay, you know what, you start off with saying 10-day streak, 10 continuous day, I'm going to run 10 kilometers every single day just to
Wow.
get back into shape, right? Just makes it more interesting, right? So you keep building those milestones. Then when these are all intrinsic, then you bring it out to the next person. I like, fine, earlier last year I said, okay, it'll be great to have a run with Meher, right? I've been participating in different events, and obviously she was never into running, right? So started picking up on that, and last year around September, October, both of us participated in a 3 kilometer run, right? It was fascinating, right? So to go along with that in that journey with her, where you put a small milestone in front of her, I said, Meher, it'll be amazing if we could run together. I keep getting those medals after my run. It'll be amazing for you to have a medal. And she said, yeah, Baba, that makes sense. Let's do it, right? And then she committed to it. So to me, those milestones are, and I think that's also part of evolution, Chaitanya, is that when we are growing up and the kind of strata we come from is it those milestones were always external in nature for us, right? Get those marks, get those degrees, get those batches of promotions and whatnot. Health and fitness is something wherein each of those milestones can very much be intrinsic, right? You don't have to show it to the world. You really don't have to do. You're not doing it for anybody else. You're doing it for yourself. And therefore, you build those milestones for your own self. Then,
Absolutely, sir. So actually, okay, folks, for those who are watching, just to give you some context, you'll keep seeing me call Saurabh sir. That's because he is a senior of mine from college, and in our college we had a rule that you will call a senior sir, no matter how old you are, and even if you're on your deathbed. So excuse that. But sir, something important that you kind of spoke about, right? Like what I've seen is that if there is one family member who becomes a little health conscious, it kind of percolates down the entire family, sort of a thing. And the reverse is also true. If there's somebody who is slightly less health conscious, that percolates across the family as well.
yeah,
Now taking that to the larger family of your professional setup, and the companies that you work for, the important role of the HR head that you played across all of these companies, one of the big challenges that we see in the companies that we work with is that I think today most of the tools are available, right? Companies are happy to invest in providing the right guidance, the right programs, but motivation, and that's something that you kind of referred to repeatedly in your conversation, right? The motivation part is kind of missing. Getting people to jump in and attack their own health and wellness in the positive way, even though really they are the only ones who are going to benefit in the entire process,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
How have you been able to tackle this entire motivation issue when you work with companies? What are you able to take from your own story and kind of push others to sort of
Yeah.
go down that path?
Great question, Chaitanya. And I'm going to pick from my own self and then I'm going to build on that, right? So, for almost little more than 2 decades, every single person in my family, starting with my dad, who comes from an armed forces background, just like yours, would harp on me that, what I'm doing is wrong, in terms of
Mm,
abusing my body, in terms of all the bad habits, right from the eating to drinking and whatnot. Never listened, right? Because as I said, I had all the right all the excuses in the world to give, like all of us do that, right? Until that trigger came, and trigger came on my own. My daughter never said that, Dad, what did you do? You did not help me. She didn't say that. She was too young to even understand that.
yeah.
That that the trigger and that motivation to carry on with the trigger was always intrinsic, right? The inspiration came from my daughter, no doubt about it. Now, if I just extrapolate that, therefore, right, and in last 3.5 4 years, I've had multiple situations where elders, my family members, my own dad for that matter, or friends and family have said, hey, you know what, amazing journey you've had, can you speak to our son? Can you get him to do it for just the way you did it? Can you speak to my nephew? Can you speak to my daughter, right? And then inspire or motivate them to get onto a journey, right?
Mm,
I've never done that. I'll be very honest with you. I've never done that because when I look at my own self, I said, no matter how much I speak, it's not
mm,
going to happen, right? But what I do believe does happen is when you talk about your story, when you talk about your journey, and in a very authentic manner, which people can relate to, then it does happen, right? So I never have gone ahead and spoken to somebody, hey, listen, why aren't you taking care of your health? I've never
mm,
gone ahead and said, hey, why aren't you taking care of your food habits? Why don't you get into walks or running for that matter? Never done that. What I've definitely done is talk about my journey, right? I write a lot, and you talked about my social media posts, especially on LinkedIn. The reason I do is because I know that that trigger can come, right? And I've had people across the world sitting across talk, reach out to me, say, hey, listen, we read your post. I read your post, got into running. Thanks a lot, right?
mm.
I would be lying if I say that it doesn't make you feel happy about it. It absolutely does.
Yes.
But the point I'm trying to make here is, therefore, in organizations, what I've seen work is creating those champions, right,
Mm,
who have gone through their own journeys, and not just like my own for that matter, and then let them talk about it, not in a prescriptive manner, in a manner which is relatable, right? See, I'll tell you one of the things which actually helped me is when I started going through my journey of the diets, and obviously I worked with a company which provides these wellness solutions, including diet plans and all of that. One of the things that the CEO of that company said, which really fascinated with me, my first conversation with him, and I told him, listen, I've never done diet, okay, and I'm very very fussy when it comes to my food habits, right? So if you're going to ask me, and I'm going to verbatim say that, if you're going to ask me to have broccoli, I'm not going to have it because I don't like it. He says, Saurabh, I'm going to give you a diet plan in which I'll ask you to eat what you like, okay,
Mm.
but there will be restriction in terms of how much you can have and what time you can have and all of that, right? And obviously I'm going to ask you to cut down on few things. I said I can cut down on few things, but then if you're going to ask me to eat something which I don't like, I'm not going to do it, right? So he
Okay.
was not being prescriptive. So to me, what really works is, if you're not if you avoid being prescriptive, play at a level which person understands and can resonate with, right? Talk about a story which they can relate to, right? And that helps, right? So finding those champions in organizations who've had their own journeys and getting them to speak about those journeys, not without being prescriptive, 100% helps, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I've seen happening both in my case, in the organizations I've worked with. Somewhere being prescriptive, I just feel that you may get people to sign up, but that the momentum gets lost, right?
Correct.
Uh, and when I say prescriptive, what I don't mean is that having somebody who can hold you accountable 100%. I feel
Mm.
accountability is very very important, and having an accountability champion with you or a partner with you is extremely important. But even that accountability partner cannot be prescriptive, should not be prescriptive,
So
right?
basically, what he's saying is that it can't be my way or the highway. It's basically saying, I think the few things that you're saying over here is that number one, having that champion who can lead by example, so to
Yeah.
say, talk
Yeah.
about their own journey and stuff. And second, if there is somebody who can kind of handhold you through that, but tell you that I'll work around what you have rather than coming and
Oh,
telling
yeah.
you that, look, here's the broccoli that you need to have,
Absolutely.
sort of a thing.
So this
Right?
company I worked with, right? What they did beautifully well was, once they created a diet plan, and I looked at the diet plan, and like, oh, this makes sense. I can do all of this, right?
Yeah.
Everything written there was something which I could have. Yes, the tough part was, cutting down on quantity, cutting down on processed food, and all of that, right? But the best part beyond that, what they did was held me accountable, right?
Hmm.
So there was a
Hmm.
WhatsApp group. Every morning I had to put in my weight. Every evening they'll check, okay, what did I eat, what I did not eat, did I deviate from my plan or not. To me that is important, to me that is accountability. And once you sign up, I think
Hmm.
that's extremely intrinsic as well, and that's why the trigger has to come from within. Because once you sign up, if you have somebody who can hold you accountable towards it, now
Yeah.
whether it's technology, whether it's an individual, that's irrelevant. That helps. To me that is extremely important.
So actually, sort of, sir, we've seen this with the cohorts that we work with as well. Like our entire model has this care manager who's constantly checking on you, chasing you. I think the third aspect over here is obviously personalization, right? So whatever recommendation, whatever targets are being set are very personal to that person's aspirations, that person's goals, and kind of trickle down. And we've seen that work very well, right? The very fact that this care manager is going to check in on me on whether the diet plan she prepared after spending 2 hours with me is something that I'm following with her or not.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
also, I think, sort of, so we've seen this consistently that in organizations where the top leadership is a little bit more health conscious, there is over a period of time there is a culture of health that kind of sets in, which is
Oh, yeah.
completely related to what you're talking about in terms of champions
So
and stuff,
I'll tell
right?
you one thing, Chaitanya. You
Mm.
know, it's amazing, right? Because growing up, we all saw those ads which used to come, right? Then and now and all of that.
Mm.
And to me, that's
Mm.
the worst thing you can do to drive home the point that why health and wellness is important, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, to me, and I'm not discounting the fact that, okay, yeah, when I look at myself, I feel good about it, right? In terms of how I
Mm.
look versus how I used to look 4.5 years back. But to me, that's just an outcome, right? The moment you make the results or make the outcome of focusing on your health and wellness as aspirational, something really aspirational, and that aspirational could very well be, as I said, you could be you're going to be more productive, you could be in a much better space of mind, or as little as which is my own experience, that that back pain which you were living with for last 10-15 years, and you thought, okay, it's going to be a part of your life forever, it vanishes. To me that's aspirational, Chaitanya, right?
Yeah.
And then the moment you index on that, and people sign up because of that, not because they're going to look good, right? That chain which then occurs, because which make people make sure that they go through the journey, will they will never fall off the treadmill, You know, and again, my own example, they just will never fall off the, because you're indexing on the right things, you're not indexing on your on things which, because all said and done, we will grow old ultimately, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What I look today, what you look today will not be the same 20 years down the line, no matter what you do with your health and fitness.
Correct.
To me, index, the right thing to index on are things which are more long term, longevity you talked about, and which are more relatable, right?
Yeah.
That is important, right? So, for example, when I talk about, and this is the reason I talked about this backache is because that's my own story, right? I had this perpetual backache which I was living with for since the time I was about 30, right? So,
Yeah.
10, 11 long years, and was excruciatingly bad pain. I lived with it, right?
Hmm.
Got into this journey 6 months, it vanished. I've not had that back pains for last 3.5 years, right? Without
Yeah.
any medication, without any physiotherapy, nothing, just by focusing on my health and fitness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if somebody was to tell me that you do this and that back pain will not be there, which gives you sleepless nights, I
Hmm.
would 100% do it, right?
Yeah.
So that's to me is important to index on the right things
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
people to carry forward, and that indexing has to happen by those champions which you create in the organization.
Yeah. So it's not just about having a few, it has to be a really deeply percolated into the organization, right?
Oh yeah,
Somebody you can relate to who can actually come and personalize that for you.
absolutely.
So, Saurabh sir, would love to hear maybe like in, and you can keep names out and stuff. And see again, I think somewhere the theme of today's conversation is around how do you motivate people, because I think what needs to be done is something that most
Yeah.
people are aware of. Would love to hear an example of where this model of creating the champions and all worked, and in other companies where maybe you struggled with that, even at a high level. Again, you don't need to name anybody, but I would just like to hear the challenges you see on both sides, sort of a thing.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing.
Mm.
In last 3 years since the time I've been on this journey, and wherever I have, taken a conscious call in organizations to, roll out or do interventions around health and wellness, it has never failed. The
Mm.
time it has taken to succeed has differed, and that is where I can give you example, right? So an example where an organization just latched onto to it, much smaller organization, 50 people. The leader of the organization was already into a journey of her own, and when I proposed that we should take it up and take it up as like an intervention where we build a health and wellness initiative or intervention or health and fitness intervention for everybody. This was at the peak of COVID, by the way. The
Wow.
organization had been forced to be go 100% remote, like all of us did. And I said, okay, you know what? Let's do something about the fact that people do take care of their own fitness and wellness, both physical and mental, right? So very easy, because the person, the leadership, the CEO of the organization was herself on that journey, right? And she said, absolutely, let's create something, right?
Mm.
We
Mm.
found a partner who had this was a partner, by the way, outside India. There was nobody in India who was doing something similar, who helped us create a 3 month intervention focusing on health and wellness, health and fitness, right? It involved steps, it involved meditation, it involved yoga. People had to log in, people had to, all of that.
Mm. Mm.
It worked beautifully well, right? So much so that 3 months we created all that gamification and all that, so much so that that the organization continued doing that for next 2 years again, right? We just continued renewing different challenges, different, and then
So I'm guessing some of these champions would actually put out
oh yeah,
their
yeah.
results, how they're moving, how what
all of
progress they've
that
made, and stuff like
all
that.
of that, right? There was a social there was a platform on which you could post. It was firstly it was an in-house thing, then people started taking it out to the social media, public
Mm.
forums, and it just happened,
Snowball.
right? An additional benefit of that with the organization saw was that people they actually saw a huge uptick in their employer brand itself, right? Because
Mm.
certainly they start talking about their employer brand as we are an employer which focuses on people's health and wellness, health and
Mm.
fitness, right? And amazing, right? So to the extent that the people candidates would come in and they will talk about, hey, listen, we saw that post, what do you do about it? Can you speak to us about it? This is 2021, 2022 I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Cut to another organization, much larger, 500 people, 600 people organization, distributed across 7 locations across the globe. We tried doing this,
Mm.
uh, and it took us some time before we could, because of two reasons. One, we could not find a champion, right? We could not find a champion right from the leadership, because they were extremely busy, growing extremely fast. And for this was a good to have, for them was a good to have. Never, we could not get to a stage where they realize that it's a must to have.
Hmm.
Until we reach a stage where they start seeing attrition, right?
Okay.
Attrition, and obviously attrition had multiple reasons around it, but because we were focused on figuring out the reasons for the attrition, and one of the reasons was fatigue, right? Burnout, because the
Hmm.
organization was moving so fast, long hours, the real hustle. I mean, you would know this, right? You're in this space. And people start calling that out, right? This
Correct.
again was towards the end of COVID, closing of lockdown, getting back to work. And the organization certainly starts seeing an uprise in the attrition levels, right?
Hmm.
And when we could present that analysis that listen, people are burning out, right? People are calling that out, and they're reaching, they rather exit out and look for other opportunities than stick around. It is imperative that we start tackling that, right? It's then that trigger happened amongst the leadership of that organization. Hey, can we do something about it, right?
Got it. Got
And
it.
then that's where the employee assistance programs came in, the therapy sessions started coming in, the entire wellness program started setting in. So it took some time. As I said, I've had situations where it has taken longer than possibly it should have for the organization to latch on to doing something around the health and wellness of people. But then it started happening, right? So with this very organization, the annual health checkup became a absolutely mandatory thing. It was uh, when the renewal for their insurance plan came in, they made sure that the health checkup is part of that and made it. Or if you're able to place, if they're already seeing that problem, right,
Hmm.
of productivity loss, of attrition, it will happen. You just need to package it properly and then present it. That's really
So
how
sort
it
of, it almost feels like everybody needs a trigger. Your trigger was your daughter cycling, and for this company, the trigger was basically seeing those results, sort of a thing, right? And then they suddenly realize, and it starts percolating. Unfortunately, sort of a lot of times, what we see as a trigger is basically that in the company they realize that some 30 odd year old had like a massive health issue suddenly, right? And that's when the organization suddenly wakes up saying, hey, how is this happening? See, at the end of the day, at some level, I think we do end up spending a lot more time at work than we do
Yeah.
at home. Our job sort of defines who we are, and I think there are certain expectations that come with that from the organization as well.
Yeah.
In that context, also, do you see the HR playing a larger role than just saying, I mean, is this an important, or rather is the employee's health an important or a core aspect of the HR's job description? And what kind of organizations, I'm sure that maybe not in all sizes of organizations, but in larger organizations, just like your daughter was looking at you as a guardian, I'm sure a lot of employees look at you as a guardian as well. Like,
Yeah,
would
yeah.
love to hear your thoughts on that, what organizations see it this way, sort of a thing.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Yeah. Chaitanya, if you ask me, not just HR, right? As leaders of the organization, do I feel or do I believe that we have a responsibility towards the health and wellness of our people? There's no
Hmm.
doubt in my mind about it, right? Um is it a new thing? I would say no. Is it
Hmm.
now more easily recognizable? I would say yes. And the only thing I could or one of the biggest thing I can thank for, and thank possibly is the wrong word. Uh, One of the reasons that has happened is because what transpired during COVID, the tough times which we all went through COVID, right? And what
Hmm.
is happening even post COVID nowadays, right? So I think the realization that if as an organization you don't fulfill your responsibility towards the health and wellness of your people, you're missing a big point there, right? Both in terms of how productive your people are,
Hmm.
also how well you're recognized as an employer brand. Okay.
Hmm.
Earlier on, I think, and I do give this example, and I really like the fact that now when I speak to people, when we're evaluating people during interviews, 9 out of 10 people talk about, do you have health insurance? What kind of health insurance do you have? Right? It's amazing that people do talk about it. 5 years back, possibly not even 5 out of 10 people would say that, right? And it's a great place to be in because people now do recognize that if the organization is not doing its bit towards my own health and
Hmm.
my family's health and well-being, I possibly would not like to join this organization, right?
Got it.
And I think as HR professionals, as leaders in the organization, we need to realize that gone are the days when health and wellness of your people was a good to have. It is an absolute must to have, right?
Hmm.
You're going to lose out on good talent, top talent. You're going to lose out on having a good, strong employer brand in the out there in the market. More importantly, you're going to lose out on the productivity and the well-being of your people, right? So you may have a large team in place, but they may not be productive if you're not focusing on their health and wellness. If they're not productive, it's a bottom line impact ultimately, right? So to me, as leaders, one part of your thinking needs to be that how am I elevating the overall health and wellness of my people, because ultimately it is going to benefit the overall as the organization. That's a
Got it.
given to me.
So, sort of, sir, I get the employer branding part very clearly, right? And I think that's something again that we've started observing as well. Like a lot of, I mean, we've interviewed people who've left various companies, and they will at least stand up and say that, hey, this new company had better benefits than the other
Yeah,
company. There, I really felt cared for by
yeah,
my manager, by my employer, and so on and so forth.
yeah.
I think the employer branding part is one, but on the productivity side, right? How all of these health initiatives actually impact productivity and are able to drive productivity higher. Is it more talk, or is there real data? Have we been able to prove that? Have you been able to prove that in the companies you worked with and stuff?
No, no, it's not talk at all,
Okay.
Chaitanya, right? So I can talk about it. And I can talk from a purely from a data perspective, right?
No.
Organizations which I've worked for and have done these health wellness initiatives on a long term basis, year 2 years long, have seen significant impact on parameters or metrics like the leaves being taken, right? And when I say leave, I'm not talking about the privilege leaves or the vacation leaves where people are going out, but because of sickness, right? Because of bad health, right? Seen significant improvement in terms of the kind of health insurance claims which have come into the organization,
Got it.
which has a direct impact on the kind of premiums which you pay next year, right? Has seen significant impact on the kind of productivity when it comes to outcomes, right? The same team has been able to deliver more, right? Whether it is around sales, whether it is around product, whether it is around shipping out new features, all of that, right? So there are multiple dimensions in which we've been able to prove, or we've been able to showcase that by indexing on health and wellness, there have been positive impact on all of these metrics. Another metrics I can talk about is the overall employee experience, right? The net NPS, the promoter score of an organization has gone up. Now, obviously, there can be people can argue that there can be multiple reasons for that. Absolutely. How do we then drill down on the fact that health and wellness has contributed towards that? Create those sections. So, okay, until 4 years back, 5 years back, we would do an employee survey or an employee feedback survey. We'll never talk about, okay, the health and wellness part of it.
Sure.
Now we actually talk about that and then see what people have to say about it, right? And
Got
we
it.
see an uptick there as well, right?
Hmm.
So all these are metrics which then tell you that there is definitely a positive correlation in your business outcomes.
Yes.
The moment you start indexing on employee health and wellness.
Got it. So, Saurabh sir, actually, some of this we also see, for example, in the cohorts that we work with, in the companies that we work with, we are able to very clearly demonstrate and show a reduction in hospitalizations. Now, there is a very clear impact of the hospitalizations on productivity, because if there is somebody in the family, whether it's your mom, your dad, your daughter, whoever is admitted, you're basically absent for those five days from this thing, right? But otherwise, I think we've not reached the stage where we are able to demonstrate impact on revenue and other things. Now, sort of, so I mean, from this conversation, one of the things that I'm kind of taking away and loving to hear is, what would it take for us to create like thousands of more Saurabh Nigams, right? How would you have all HRs think about things in this direction? What would it take in that for us to get this sort of a thing?
So Chaitanya, first thing I would say patience, right? It's not going to happen overnight, right? I
Hmm.
think okay, let me put it this way. Where we were 3 4 years, okay, not three. Let's say where we were a year back versus where we are now, right?
Hmm.
In
Hmm.
terms of understanding and realization amongst the leaders, among the HR practitioners, as I said, that it's no longer a good to have. It's an absolutely must to have for you to focus on health and wellness and of your people. Uh, I mean, we made significant strides. There's no doubt about it. Now, what we need to continue doing is build on this, right? Build on the success stories. Build on taking it out. And organization like yours, you work with so many organizations yourself. You have clients where I'm sure you've created impact, right?
Yep.
Take it out. Take it out to the larger audiences there. Thankfully, we are in such a well connected world now where it is possible to talk about these. Come up with innovative initiative which will enable people to be held accountable towards it, right? The first part is which is talking about it in terms of your stories which you have created, success stories which you have created, is really to get the trigger going, right,
Correct.
without being prescriptive. Second part is really making people accountable towards insurances. Those to me is something which we need to continue building on top of where we are, and then eventually it will happen, right? So I think what we need to be clear about is, because it's so much intrinsic in nature, right? Your own health and wellness has to be you need to be intrinsically motivated towards it, right? That percentage, whether today if you are 25-30% there, taking it to 50%, 60% possibly will take a lot longer, but moving from that 50 to 90 will happen very quickly, I would say. But I think we need to continue on this journey of building on where we are and continue talking about it, continuing to showcase positive outcomes, positive results, talk about stories which are relatable, and then make sure that people are accountable towards it, and ultimately it's going to happen. That's really what I would say. There's no other way to it.
So, Saurabh sir, is there a particular archetype of companies of HR leaders whom you see this happening more, or is this something that you think eventually every? I mean, and I know you talked about the HR team itself realizing that there's a need to have, but is there an early adopter curve? Is there other specific archetypes? What are the kind of people who are buying into this earlier sort of a thing?
I wish I could answer that, because to me that piece is also work in progress in my mind as well, right? So
Got it.
I don't think there is an archetype of an organization. There's definitely an
Hmm.
archetype of the people who will imbibe it faster than the others, and I gave you the two examples very clearly.
Hmm.
The role which an organization like yours and an individual like you can play is by creating the right uh, information, or a storyboard which will resonate with people who are not the immediate adapters, right? So
Yeah.
if you're pitching to an organization, pitching to a leader who's already in that journey, I think it's going to be much easier. Now that person could be sitting in a large corporate MNC, or
Hmm.
could be a 100-member startup. It will happen, right?
Yeah.
But if you're pitching to a guy, to an individual, to a leader who still feel that it's a good to have, then you have work to do. And then the work to do is creating that storyboard for that person to understand that, listen, this is a must to have because it impacts your productivity, it impacts your bottom line, right? And that's a role which you need to continue playing. I'm sure you're already doing that, right? Now that person could
Yeah.
be sitting in a 50-member startup, that individual could be sitting in a 1,000-member organization as well, but the effort it will take for someone like you to turn or convert that person will be similar, which is creating that storyboard for that person.
So actually, sort of again, like bang on, right? Like what we've seen is that there are companies which have like literally bootstrapped are in the first few months of operations, but even there, the founder is very clear that
Yeah,
focus on health has to be there, and it happens from day one, sort of a thing.
yeah, yeah.
So I think you're right. It's not so much about the archetype of the organization, but the archetype of the leadership over there that's kind of driving
So
some of
I'll give
these
you an
points.
example, right? So one of my clients here at Pro Growth People Solution, there's 7 people. They're currently 7 people. They just
Yeah.
started 6 months back, right? I onboarded them, started working with them like 3 weeks back. First thing the CEO or the founder asked me is, yeah, get me the health insurance for everybody. I said, like, for 7 people. He said, yeah, yeah, get me the health insurance, right? And he's talking about a health insurance for the employee, 2 kids, and parents, right?
Got
And
it. Got
now
it.
the issue is, okay, now I'll tell you where the issue is. So this person is spot on. He's like, you know what? I don't want people, even if we are 7 people, to worry about, as we said, about themselves, about the people, and all of that. Now the issue I'm facing right now, or I was facing up until day for yesterday, is to find an insurance provider who's willing to give an insurance policy for a 7-member organization covering the parents as well, right? So,
Yeah.
so that's the thing, right? So my point is that, and again, I've had a situation where I'm talking to working with a company which is 300 people and still has a health insurance policy which is with a sum assured of 2 lakhs, which is not good enough, right? So, and it's been a Herculean task for me to move them from a 2 lakh policy to a 5 lakh policy, right?
Hmm.
To get them to bundle a health checkup onto the policy and pay for it, for that matter, right? So it's in the mindset. It is based on the individual and the leadership team out there, and where they are indexing on your ability to turn them around. That's really where it is.
Correct, correct. And I think all of these follow a curve, right? You will get some basic insurance, then you look at wellness. I mean, it's almost like a Maslow's pyramid in terms
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
how you recognize and what you want to invest in.
But
Some of
Chaitanya,
the
here's
wellness is
the
a little
thing.
higher.
Once you get the momentum going, okay,
Yeah.
then and I love the fact where organization where I am pulled or I am catching up with the demands which are coming from the other side in terms of the kind of health and wellness initiative they want, right?
Hmm.
So, like for
Hmm.
example, this particular client of mine, which I talked about, 7-member organization, they're like, okay, I want the health insurance policy, right,
Hmm.
covering parents as well. I love the fact because that's a right thought process to have. Now it's a challenge for me and the providers like you and us to then figure out the solution for them, right? That's the place to be in, honestly, right? So the what I'm trying to say is that once the momentum kicks in, even in organization where they were not the early adopters, and you had to really push through by creating the mindset, but once they start seeing the result, then you never need to sell. You just don't need to sell because then the pull comes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then there, I mean, that's a flywheel that's kind of created. So let's say in all of this, the HR team is the sutradhar of sorts, right? Like, while there might be a leader who will come and say that XYZ is required, it's finally up to you to kind of take it, make it successful, make it kind of build that flywheel sort of a thing as such in most
For
of your
me,
experience.
HR plays the role of a facilitator, Chaitanya. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
HR will fail miserably to drive this
Hmm.
unless there is a buy-in from the top management or the top leadership. It has to happen from there. Okay. Uh, HR can play the role of facilitator by showcasing the right data points and so on and so forth, by building the narrative within the organization, creating those champions out there, all of that. Yes, absolutely,
Hmm.
the facilitators, and they need to be the facilitators, but it cannot happen unless you get the buy-in from your leadership team. There's
Got it.
absolutely no two ways about it.
So, Saurabh, sir, last thing, and given the time of the year that we are in, would love to hear two things: your New Year resolution, one for your own personal self, your family, and two for the companies that you're working with and where you're holding this entire mantle, sort of a thing. So,
Yeah.
go shoot.
So Chaitanya, I wrote about this yesterday. I have never been a person of resolutions, right?
Okay.
I do love to create milestones for myself, as I
Hmm.
talked about it, right? So I do have my milestones for this year, which I've created, and those milestones were created much way back in October, November itself. So it's not a factor of
Not
January.
the New Year.
And those milestones are very simple, straightforward. It is like one, I don't want to get off the treadmill, right? I don't want to get off the journey I'm on because of the trigger which I've had, because my why is very, very clear in my mind. Also, because I do believe that I'm able to create positive impact on some
Yeah.
people who are able to see this and get on to, their own journeys, right? So to me, that's important. Yes, I do have few milestones on my running journey which I've created for myself. And so yeah, hopefully I should get there, right?
Yeah.
For organizations I work with, I do want to make sure that I continue to play the role of evangelizing, being able to convince, being able to rally around leaders to help them understand that why it's important to index on the health and wellness of their teams, why it's a must to have, it's no longer a good to have, and as you said, keep expanding that pie of people, or that ecosystem of organizations and individuals who index on that, because I do believe that you know it may sound philosophical, but I think the world would be a much better place if we have much more healthier people, right? Both physically and emotionally. That's really what it boils down to.
Got it. So broadly, it's about doing more of what you've already been doing and doing it better, sort of a thing. Any message for other HR leaders? How do they step up to being the health champs? How can they do more of what you've been doing? What guidance would you like to provide to them, sort of a thing?
I would say start with your own self, Chaitanya, right? See, a lot of time we hear this that as HR practitioners, HR leaders, we want to have seat at the table, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Seat at the table, you got to earn it. Nobody's going to give it to you on a platter, right? I also feel that HR is a highly challenging profession. There's no prescribed playbook out there, right? And you need to be at the top of your game, both physically and emotionally, mentally, for you to be able to do this job well, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Only way you can do that is when you take care of your own self, right?
Got it.
And again, I'm saying this out of my own example. I'm a far better HR professional now what I was 4 years back, purely in terms of the way I think, the clarity of thought process I have. Obviously, yes, there's another 4 years of experience which has now there, but also because I do believe that I'm in a much better space, right, mentally and physically, right? So I think it starts with you. It really has to start with you, because unless you are a champion yourself of health and wellness, how are you going to propagate that into your organizations, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then once you're able to do that for your own self, then you take it down, take it to your people, because I think the value which you would have added to the organization which you are part of by taking down the culture of health and wellness and fitness in your organization is going to be immense. It's not a good to have, right? I talked about matrices which you will be able to impact if you were to index on that, right? But you'll not be able to do it unless you start with your own self. So to me, the message is very clear: start with your own self, take care of your own health and wellness, both physical and mental, and then take it across to your own team, HR team. Then you take it to the organization, get your leaders convinced if they're not yet convinced, and then you'll see magic unfold. You'll absolutely see magic unfold in your own organization. And I do believe that cannot be a better thing which you can do for your team, with your organizations, if you're able to take them onto that journey.
Yeah, yeah. And I think with that, Saurabh, sir, you also answered how do we create 1,000 more Saurabh Nigams, right? So with that, if other HR leaders also get out of that journey, they'll kind of get there. But I think this has been great, Saurabh, sir. So thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. Would look forward to having more such conversations in the coming year. And all the best with your own journey and your startup, Saurabh.
Thanks a lot, Chaitanya, for inviting me over, and thanks a lot for doing what you guys doing.